Well, thanks for the chance to come chat. I know you've had a very full day. You've had wonderful panels, wonderful opportunities to look at the offerings. I know PW was here for lunch, giving you a futurist technologist view of the subject matter at hand, so I'm sure that was super. I'm neither a futurist nor a technologist. I'm a liberal arts history major, all right? And so I'm going to come at this maybe in a slightly different way. I'm going to come at it from a contextual point of view. Where is this in the human journey? And I'm probably not even going to get to multi-factor authentication at the end, okay? But frankly, when John asked me, both Johns asked me to come and do this, they said, what's your topic? And I said, why is this still so hard? Was the topic that I settled on. And it's technologically hard, but there are other reasons. So that's my part, that's my contribution. You've heard other pieces of data, bricks to put into the edifice. Here's particularly my set of stones. So I've been talking about this a lot, frankly, probably 15 years. One of my most memorable opportunities to do this was at Black Hat in Las Vegas. I was a year or two out of government. This is pre-Snowden, so it wasn't as high risk as it became later on. Okay, and I was in a room, about 3,000 claiming to be semi-reformed hackers at Caesar's Palace in Vegas, and I was going to talk about cyber. So, I began the commentary to this group with. I'm just a history major here, but I think this cyber thing's catching on. And I got that kind of, actually it was more polite laughter from that group, but it was a positive response. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm teasing, okay? But I think even you people don't understand how big a deal this is. I think you underestimate the disruptive effect of the cyber thing on the human condition. I'm talking to a room full of 3,000 hackers. And then I kind of played my own Ed McMahon to my own Johnny Carson and had Ed McMahon say, how big a deal is it, Johnny? All right. And my response was, this is as big a deal, or we haven't seen anything this big a deal since the European discovery of the Western Hemisphere. I kind of played the clock back, 500 years, the Age of Sail, the Age of Discovery, Prince Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, the Cape of Good Hope, and so on. If you think back during that period, which, by the way, was the last great age of globalization, right? And so for those of us, particularly IWP kind of folks, who try to bring to bear all sorts of disciplines on the problem at hand, I think there are transferable experiences from the human activity during the great age of exploration and what it is we're doing now. If you think back to 500 years, that great age of globalization, that exploration, the European explosion, changed just about everything. It changed view of self in terms of how big was the human family. It changed views of the planet. It changed the foods we ate. It changed the products we commerced in. It changed the diseases we contracted, certainly. I was out at the wonderful Maritime Museum in San Diego about 3 or 4 summers ago, and it's on ships in the harbor there. And in one of them, there's a display that says the Great Age of Sail. And it's talking about this period. And it said 500 years ago, great civilizations were growing and making their contribution to human knowledge, but they're growing up independently, autonomously, and in ignorance of one another. And what the Great Age of Sail created was connectivity between these isolated civilizations. And what we got was the greatest explosion of human learning, human commerce in history to that point. We also got the global slave trade and global piracy and the spread of syphilis one way and pox the other. Okay? And that, by the way, was connectivity at 12 knots an hour with a favoring wind. and we're now doing it at 186,000 miles a second. That connectivity jammed together the good, the bad, the strong, and the weak in ways they had not been jammed together. And it took several hundred years to sort out the second and third order effects of these civilizations coming in contact. I mean, I actually mentioned this, completely different context at Oxford, okay, in the Oxford Union in a debate. It had to do with the War on Terror, but I actually said the greatest hour of the British Navy was its declared war on the global slave trade in the 19th century. I actually compared British naval activities in the 19th century to American activities in the 21st when it comes to the War on Terror. But we digress. I'm just saying it took several hundred years to sort out the implications of this new interconnectivity. So I thought that was actually really pretty damn good in terms of impressing on the audience, hey, even you underappreciate this. And I did the rest of the talk, and I get all done, and I'm walking off, and I'm heading back to my tower at Caesar's Palace, and an elderly gentleman, which is an unusual event at someone of my age, all right, at Black Hat, comes up to me and says, pretty good speech there, Hayden. Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, but you lowballed how big a deal this is. I said, all right, smart person. He said this is more like the human development of language. He actually, we conversed briefly. You can't get to the tower without going through the casino. That's how it's designed. So we're jing, 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 jing. We're walking through, and he's trying to lay onto me why it was even more important than I said. And fundamentally, what he was saying is, you're right. It had a great influence on our external universe. All right. But this one, the last stage of globalization, this one is changing human cognition. This is changing our internal universe. It's not just changing the world around us, it's actually changing how we function. Now, intuitively, I think I think I get that, because I watch my kids and grandkids relate to digital devices, and clearly they are relating to them. And I think anyone who has teenagers knows they don't do research the way we used to do research. I mean, it doesn't go down, it just goes like this across the surface. I mean, it changes habits of thought. And I intuitively accepted that as kind of maybe a nice metaphor, but I don't think it really does change the brain. So I was out at Aspen a year or two later, and we had these 4 brain experts at one of the events talking about the human brain. And I figured, well, what the heck? Let's give it a shot. So I walked up afterward and says, there I was at Caesar's Palace with 3,000 people, and I related the story. I said, and then this guy stopped me, and it's not this, it's human cognition. I said, is that true? And he said, no. You cannot pass on to your successor learned adaptations. All right, so the structure of the brain does not change. However, the way the brain is wired in individuals will change based upon the tools that the individual uses. So the brain structure, I mean, it's not going to be something that's inherited, but just the way the synapses fire will be different from a generation that has, in essence, lived in daily dialogue, hours upon hours, with digital devices. That's really a big deal. And here we are now, like I said, it took a couple of centuries to deal with the second, third, and fourth order effects of the last age of globalization. Here we are now trying to deal with the effects of this one. And it's doing more than the last age. It's actually changing cognition, thought processes, in addition to changing our external world. So I guess my first Roman numeral in the outline the nuns told me to make before I would ever organize a talk, first Roman numeral is, it's a really big deal. Second Roman numeral is kind of, it's not that good a deal. Okay, I was out there again at Vegas, and I need to tell you. So I get parachuted into this universe in the mid-1990s. I had just come out of Bosnia and Europe. I was the J2 for U.S. forces in Europe, and the all-consuming conflict was the war in Bosnia, which was medieval in its origins, and frankly medieval in its conduct. all right? And then I get reassigned, and I get parachuted into San Antonio, the head of the Air Intelligence Agency, and I see some folks nodding already. And the Air Force was kind of ahead of the rest of the defense community in thinking about things cyber. And so my staff probably never actually said this to me, but if I kind of summarize my first week or two on the job, it was, glad you're here, General. Sit down, take out a clean sheet of paper, write this down. Okay? And they actually said to me, land, sea, air, space, cyber. It's a domain. Think of it as an operational environment. And for those of you with military experience, knowing anything about American military doctrine, that is now American military doctrine. It's just not the crazy guys down in San Antonio. It is in whatever we're calling our 1-1 now. All right? And secondly, when you tell a GI it's a domain, click. Oh, why didn't you say so? You made it so complicated with all that bandwidth and network stuff. It's a domain. Domains have characteristics. This one's inherently strategic. This one's characterized by great speed. This one's characterized by great maneuverability. Okay, I'm picking up on this. I mean, you can just begin to know how to relate to it. So back to Vegas. All right, so I'm there and saying it's a really big deal, but it's not that good a deal. And I go, land, sea, air, space, cyber. I'm pretty sure I know who made this one. Now, these four, he did a good job. And I'm suspicious about who did this one. And you screwed it up. We did not make this domain the way we would have made it if we had been thoughtful about it. Right? It is man-made. Okay? We can change it. It's the only one where geography is actually within our own control. All right? Vint Cerf, who actually is one of the fathers of the internet, lives just up the road here in Falls Church. And Vint and I become friends in my second life. And Vint comes to my class at George Mason. Okay? It's really kind of cute, back to the great age of sail and so on. It's kind of like saying, well, today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about European exploration and a special treat, Christopher Columbus. Because, Vint was the guy who did this. When they went, he was there. I actually have a picture of him at Stanford back in the day. And he talks about ARPANET and the response to the statement of work and what they try to do, which was, to link a limited number of nodes, all of whom I know and all of whom I trust, so that they can actually exchange large volumes of data quickly and easily. So I asked Vint, did you think about security? Did it occur to any of you guys out there at Stanford that maybe, and Vint's very honest, well, Mike, it wasn't in the statement of work. And he freely admits the technology wasn't available. It wasn't there at the time. And then he adds as a footnote, and hey, we had no idea this thing was going to take off. So what you have here is a man-made domain that responded to the ARPA statement of work. Build me something that's going to link a few labs and a few universities so I can move a lot of stuff really easily. And you all know this, but that remains the architectural principle of today's World Wide Web, with a limitless number of nodes, very few of whom I know, and a whole bunch of whom never deserve my trust. And yet, it's all been wired for that ease of use. So that's the second point, right? Really big deal, incredibly disruptive, not designed for everything we would have wanted it to be designed for. The third point is, so what could go wrong once you've done that? I have this category of what I call cyber sins and sinners. So let me just rapidly go through my kind of taxonomy of the things that can go wrong in the cyber domain. When it comes to cyber sins, I list four. And I usually do this. I actually did this morning at the Reagan Center with view graphs, but we talked about not doing view graphs here for a less formal presentation. Cyber sins, number one, is stealing your stuff, which remains overwhelmingly the sin of choice by those who want to do us harm. In fact, if we were doing this 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have said, the issue is they're stealing our stuff, and pretty much left everything else on the ground. Now, they haven't reduced the stealing our stuff part, but they've actually walked down this ladder of darkness to do other things as well, in addition to stealing our stuff. There is now corrupting our stuff. So whereas you've got the OPM attack, all right, where, what's the current count, 22.5 million deeply personnel records were stolen almost certainly by the Chinese, just the theft of stuff. You've got the destruction of stuff in, let's say, the Sony North America attack, where the North Koreans go after Sony, and they did steal stuff, but they also destroyed things in the file. The Iranians go after the Sands casino system because the owner of the Sands casino is a Jewish American who's been very vocal in his support of Prime Minister Netanyahu and very vocal in his condemnation of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And the Iranians attack Sands casino and destroy data. Now, I think the industry in the United States that's most vulnerable to the destruction of data, most vulnerable to a wiping attack, would be financial services, which would really be frightening. I'd put gaming kind of right there underneath it in terms of how bad is it when your data is wiped. So you've got the theft of data, you've got the destruction of data, or simply the loss of confidence in our data. The third thing is an attack on our network, so that our on and off ramps into the cyber domain are denied to us. So you had the Iranians after the Stuxnet attack, attributing Stuxnet to the United States, and then conducting massive distributed denial of service attacks against American banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo. I mean, in essence, denying them their digital personality, denying them their digital presence. And you know how DDoS works. I mean, the websites are still there, they're just not available to anybody to go. So you've got theft of data, destruction or debasement of networks. And then finally, there's also the ability to do something up here in this domain and create effects down here. In other words, use a weapon comprised of ones and zeros to create effects in physical space. The poster child is the one I mentioned already, Stuxnet, which was, again, using a digital weapon to convince 1,000 centrifuges in the Iranian nuclear facility at Natanz to spin at self-destructive speeds, while the governing operating system is kind of telling the operators, there's nothing interesting to see here, folks, just move along. And they had no understanding of what was happening in the centrifuge hall until things started to go snap, crackle, and pop, and 1,000 centrifuges were destroyed. I don't get into any discussions about who may or may not have done that, but I have allowed myself the freedom to comment, boy, that's really a big deal. Okay? When, again, former director of CIA, as John said, when we worked there together, hey, destroying 1,000 Iranian centrifuges is kind of an absolute good, all right? Check. But let me describe for you that in only very slightly different words. Someone, almost certainly a nation state, because this is too hard to do from the basement, okay? Someone, almost certainly a nation state, during a time of peace, has just used a weapon comprised of ones and zeros to destroy what another nation could only describe as critical infrastructure. Ooh, that's a big deal. I write in the book, I said on 60 Minutes, somebody's crossed the Rubicon. We got a legion on the other side of the river now, and it's not going back. Our species is not in the habit of sheathing weapons that we have pulled out to use even once. So you see not many, but you see other examples of the ones and zeros creating things down here. You got the attack, when was it, in December? Almost certainly sponsored by the Russian Federation, probably done by Russian criminal groups, going after the Ukrainian power grid and entering it through the admin structure, hopping across to the operational side, and making lights go out for about, 750,000 Ukrainians. So we've got another example of a weapon comprised of ones and zeros creating physical destruction, creating physical effects. So those are kind of the sins: theft, destruction of data, destruction of network, physical destruction. Those are the sins. The sinners: nation states, criminal groups. I don't know what to call this third group. Activists, hacktivists, LulzSec, Anonymous, 20-year-olds who haven't talked to the opposite gender in months. I don't know. Okay. I'm just going to lump them in as the disaffected, all right? Okay. And their talent is pretty much racked and stacked the way I gave it. Nation states are most capable, criminal gangs, the disaffected. That's probably good, all right? Nation states know their actions have consequences. Criminal gangs, they do it for profit, but, just ruthless, purposeless destruction. Probably not a good ROI, not a good business model for them. These guys down here, I don't know. They could do things just out of principle, and I mean in a dark sense, but blessedly less capable the further you go down. Unfortunately, this group knows better than most. The tide's coming in, all the boats are going up. And so capabilities that we formerly would associate only with a nation state, probably going to be within the reach of criminal gangs before very long, and the lower on the ladder, the isolated are going to pick up these other. I mean, you know as well as I, you use a cyber weapon unlike a kinetic weapon, it doesn't destroy itself. It's just out there for anyone to go and learn a lot of things about it. One of my most fascinating conversations post-government was actually a long conversation in Tel Aviv with Ralph Langner. Ralph is generally credited with actually finding and deconstructing the Stuxnet weapon. So there it is. I mean, here's somebody saying, here's how they did it. Here are the tools. Here are the subsets. To be perfectly candid, is that my phone? There you go. I see, and we're still adjusting. Okay. When I do this with slides and I say nation states, okay, I have different flags up there. I put the Chinese, put the Russians, put the Iranians, put the North Koreans, and I've got the stars and stripes because we're actually really good at this, and we spend a lot of money. We got 35 people up there reporting to Fort Meade who are committed to stealing other nations' stuff. All right? Now, we do self-limit. All right? We steal stuff to keep ourselves free and to keep ourselves safe. We do not steal stuff to make ourselves rich. We do not steal for commercial advantage for American industry. I painfully point out that there aren't many countries on earth who can say that and still have it be true. I think the total number might be 5, and they're the usual suspects, the Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking tribe that traces its roots in this business back to Bletchley Park. For the rest of the world, industrial espionage fits in, by and large, for the most part, industrial espionage fits in under the rubric of state-sponsored espionage. It's just the way the rest of the world looks at it. And so, truth in lending, we do this and we do it aggressively. Criminal gangs, that second group, mostly in the post-Soviet space. Now, I've been told by people, private sector, cyber security firms, all right, cyber intelligence firms. There's been a migration in the language, in the code language of criminal gangs. It previously was almost exclusively English and Slavic languages. We're now seeing East Asian languages appear in the criminal gang coding. Still, though, predominantly in the post-Soviet space, Belarusian, Moldovan, Ukrainian, and so on. I gave a talk along these lines down at the Reagan Center for Yevgeny Kaspersky of Kaspersky Labs. It was for Kaspersky North America. And I used in my examples there about denying access to the digital domain, the massive DDoS attacks, I said, conducted by patriotic Russian hackers against the Estonian internet system in 2007 and the Georgian internet system in 2008. And I was coming off stage, and Yevgeny Evgeny stops me and says, Michael, great speech, but those really weren't patriotic Russian hackers. Okay, who are they? And he put it out, those are Russian criminal gangs acting on behalf of the Russian Federation. Now, these are my words now, not Yevgeny. But think back to the first scene of Godfather 1. Don Corleone's in the library, the wedding's going on the backyard and the patio. He's got a supplicant in the room saying, I need protection for my daughter, Don Corleone. And Don Corleone says, I will grant you this favor. But in return, I may come to you from time to time for a service. Well, Yevgeny's example is the Russian criminal gangs are permitted by the Don Vladimir in this case, to shoot out pretty much with impunity when it comes to Russian domestic law. And from time to time, the Don will then have requirements of a service. I suspect the attack on the Ukrainian power grid on behalf of the Russian Federation done by criminal gangs, so you have this nice cutout that it's not being done by the Russian government. So, cyber sins, cyber sinners. So, with that dark a thing, it's really a big deal. We didn't really do it well. There's bad stuff going on. There are a collection of sins and sinners. Most of us would then say, okay, so where the heck is my government? How come my government isn't keeping us safe then in this new domain? I'm a taxpayer. I deserve to be protected up here the way I'm protected down here. And I guess one of the very powerful themes I want to leave you with, and I'll stop in 10 minutes or so to take questions. One of the very powerful themes is I am convinced, not as a temporary, but as a permanent condition, our government will be constantly, continually late to need in the cyber domain. Right? Our government will be less capable of keeping us safe up here than it has been keeping us safe down here forever, because of the nature of our government and the nature of this domain. All right, so why do I say that? Well, number one, governments are just too slow. All right, I actually told you I did this morning down in the Reagan Center. I had a slide, and I had a picture on the slide of a congressional committee and a bunch of scruffy, teenager-looking people at a startup in Silicon Valley. And I said, it's about speed. Okay, and the government, even a well-functioning government, okay, cannot keep adequate pace with the demands of this domain. It just can't. And beyond that, just that structural issue of governments, which again, I mean, are constitutionally, in all meanings of the word, all right, are constitutionally required to go slow, to have adversarial processes, to have layers of oversight, because that's the way we need governments to work, makes the government response to this hopelessly slow. Okay. Beyond that, our government has peculiar problems doing well up here because of our political culture. And it all has to do with privacy, the Fourth Amendment, the guarantee against unreasonable search and seizure, and frankly, pre-Snowden, post-Snowden, it just doesn't matter. Our natural national allergy to government surveillance, government invasion, government touching upon our privacy. The macro sentence I'll share with you is we the people, the big people, the 335 million of us, have not yet decided what it is we want or what it is we will allow the government to do to keep us safe up here. I live upriver in McLean, so imagine I can't sleep tonight. I go out to the front door, I look outside, I see a Fairfax County police car go by, I see him shining the spotlight on my shrubbery, and my immediate thought is, I like that. That's good. Thank you, Fairfax. Now, you go ahead and picture whatever it is you think the digital equivalent is and tell me you're good. No, it's just not there. And so we will have capabilities that we will not field. We will have capacities that we will not use. Mike Rogers, the current director of NSA, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command up at Fort Meade. The metaphor I use is Mike's got first-round draft picks who are not only not on the field, they're not even suited up because he lacks the legal and policy guidance he needs to put these players in the game. Now, that'll get better, all right? We'll struggle our way forward and we'll gradually agree on some things, but I'm just telling you, right, that we, let me put it another way. You are going to be more responsible for your personal safety up here than you have been required to be responsible for your safety down here since the close of the American frontier in 1890. And that's just the way it's going to be. Which then takes us to, we're here, and you're here. And you're here to learn about cybersecurity and how you can do better at providing cybersecurity for yourself. Right? I mean, remember, we don't recognize how disruptive this is. We don't recognize the change because we're living through the changes. I mean, just think. You are here to learn how to better provide for your own security. You're not here to defend yourself against mugging. You're not here to defend yourself against car theft. You expect the government to do that. But you intuitively know the government's not coming. You know, the next sound you hear is not the digital bugle and the digital pounding of digital hoofbeats coming over the ridgeline for the cavalry to save the day. You have already intuited that you're going to have to be more responsible for your safety up here than you have ever been in your lifetime down here. Now, our species has got a good history of trying to provide for their own personal security down here. But in our lifetimes, we have not. We turn to the government and we have a fairly orderly system for doing that. It just doesn't exist up here. So you're more on your own up here than you've been down here in any of our life experience. Okay? So that's actually the punchline. That's actually I've got one more act in the play here, and I'm going to finish in a few minutes. But that's kind of the climax, and that's why you're here. That's why IWP is offering this offering, because we're just going to have to do more of it ourselves. But that's not an unnatural act. You know, we Americans usually do step in when the government's late, when the government's short. We step up and do things. That's actually a national strength. I was in Silicon Valley last week, kind of doing this to a group on that coast, and I simply made the observation: American society has all it needs to be safe up here. We just need the elements of American society to be more synchronized, okay, more harnessed towards a common effort. Let me talk a little bit then about the private sector. All right? I've kind of laid out the premise. It's the private sector, and you personally going to do a lot of the heavy lifting up here. So let me give you a maybe controversial way to think about this. When the Department of Defense issues an execute or an operations order, there's always a paragraph in there that says who is the supported and who are the supporting commands. Since we're in Virginia, let me default to the Civil War. If General Lee, General Grant were around here and he was issuing an ops order for 1st Manassas or 2nd Manassas or Spotsylvania Courthouse, he would have gone to a Corps commander and said, you, sir, your Corps, sir, your Corps is the main body. And you, gentlemen, you will conform your movements, the movements of your Corps, to the movements of the main body. Right? Supported, supporting. Right. The natural instinct, particularly somebody with my background, 39 years in government, the natural instinct when it comes to anything that's labeled security is that the government is the main body. And I'm offering you the premise that up here, in most cases, I get it, there's a footnote here. There are some things only governments can do, all right? But in most cases, the main body up here in this domain is the private sector. And the implications for the government then are the government now needs to conform its movements to the movements of the main body. What's that mean? It means get out of the way sometimes. It means pass legislation that allows the private sector to be all they can technologically be. It is along the lines of things that have already been accomplished about removing liability dangers to the private sector for the sharing of information from regulatory or antitrust burdens when it comes to doing things for cybersecurity. If you fast forward the video here, all right, you'll get to me and Mike Chertoff, former Secretary of Homeland Security, Mike McConnell, former Director of NSA and Director of National Intelligence, Dave Petraeus, former DCIA, Richard Clark, former National Security Council, both cyber and counterterrorism guy, and I could build on the list, all right? All of us shading Apple and not FBI when it comes to the grand encryption debate. And our hard question, and honest men differ, and the FBI requests are totally legitimate. No, by the way, I think the government does have the right to insist on it. So I don't view it as a constitutional question. I actually view it as a dumb choice. Because if the private sector is the main effort, okay, and the government accepts a role of the supporting as opposed to supported, even for very legitimate criminal or counterterrorism needs over here, one needs to think 3 or 4 times before imposing on the private sector a course of action that all of us agree will make the private sector a little less capable of cyber defense. Now, I get it. There are trade-offs here. All right, it's all relative. I think it's very clear in this case, right, that again, all of us with great security background, if not credentials, you may be the judge of that, shaded towards Apple. But it's all informed by the context of what it was I just described for you, that the private sector is the main effort. So you want to be really careful before you kneecap the private sector, even for things here that the government thinks are legitimate. Put another way, I told you before, I don't view it as security versus privacy. I don't view it as constitutional. I just view it as security. And the right answer for American security, best understood, wide angle, is preserve the encryption. Don't punch a hole in it. Particularly since for the last 2 or 3 years, Jim Clapper, the DNI, when Jim's testified in the Worldwide Threat Briefing, when asked what's the greatest threat to America, said, cyber. Okay? And so we in addition to your bearing your own burden, we have a political, cultural transition to make in terms of allowing the private sector a more very prominent role up here in the cyber domain. Very briefly, let me just talk about the private sector and where I see private sector energy right now. Again, having stated the premise that in most cases the main effort. I've got a traditional risk equation. I see a lot of folks in uniform, we all know this. It works for car insurance, it works for land combat, it works for cybersecurity. Risk is equal to the threat times your vulnerability to the threat times the consequence of a successful attack. Risk, threat, vulnerability, consequence. First thing you'll grab was its multiplication. I push any of those things down towards 0. Hey, let's go to the bar. We're done. Okay. Most of the history of cybersecurity has been in the V factor. Most of the history of cybersecurity has been in vulnerability reduction. Just think of your own language. Cybersecurity, oh yeah. Passwords, firewalls, got it. Cyber hygiene, turning machines off for the weekend, good sysads. Okay. Most of the history of cybersecurity has been in V, reducing vulnerability, reducing the attack surface. All right? Do V forever. It's important. Kevin Mandia, formerly Mandiant, then FireEye. Now Kevin's the CEO of FireEye. Kevin used to work for me in the Air Force. All right? So I talk to Kevin a lot. Kevin tells me if you do V like world class, like if you do V perfectly, you are going to sweep the less competent 80% of the attackers off the board, which is Kevin's way of saying there are 20%, no matter what you do in V, are getting into your network if they want to get in. If they just want to put the energy in, they're going to get in. Now, it's a good idea to slap the script kiddies off the board right away so they aren't nuisance as you're getting on with serious work. But you have to understand that even when you've done V, you're not done. That the high-end threats are still going to get in. So the current technological and entrepreneurial energy is over here in C. It's in consequence management. Put another way, it's presumption of breach. They're getting in. Get over it. Act like an adult. All right? Operate, wander, attack, survive while penetrated. Respond, be resilient, recover. Again, back to Kevin Mandia. Difference between an A and an F player is not penetration. The difference between A and F is the time between flash and bang, the time between penetration and discovery. And unfortunately, right now, the average time today is measured in months, which is really bad. Okay? And so over here in C, again, it's resilience, it's situational awareness, it's knowing when your network is operating in an anomalous fashion so that you can begin to respond, recover. V, past. C, present. T, kind of future. In physical space, the way you handle the T factor is you punch the guy back in the nose. You make him less capable of attacking you. I mean, for the GIs in the room, counter battery fire. Right? Hard to do. Hard to do, just hard to do in the cyber domain, really hard to do in the private sector. Okay? So what we see in the T factor right now is what I would call cyber threat intelligence. And I just have to share with you that there's some really good intelligence work being done in the private sector. Not intelligence-like, not intelligence light. I mean, it is full-up cyber threat intelligence. Web crawling, port scanning, foreign national employees assuming personae in Moldovan chat rooms in order to, I use Airbus as an example, not because I know much about Airbus, but it's a nice multinational, multi-product company. And so imagine how valuable it would be for a company like Airbus to have a cyber threat intelligence company come to them and say, they don't care about your wide bodies. They really are interested in your helicopters. And they, by the way, in this case, are these folks here, and these folks have traditionally been associated with these tactics, techniques, procedures, and tools. That's good stuff. And that's what we're getting out of the cyber threat intelligence private sector. I don't want to sound like a commercial, but I know one company, Eyesight Partners, it was also just bought by FireEye, whose biggest client is the federal government for their cyber threat intelligence, to give you some sense of how highly regarded it is. So the private sector is really, really doing an awful lot. And that's good. All right, back to my last week in Silicon Valley. American society's probably got all it needs here. We just need to do the right things in terms of getting these efforts synchronized and on the field, even in the face of a very disruptive, badly designed cyber domain. One final thought, and I'll quit. As you think through issues of cybersecurity, remember why we did the internet in the first place. Okay? We created something it's actually a wonderment. We're doing this here 500 years from now. The Four Seasons will still be here. Okay, we're doing the talk, and somebody says, "The Americans," and somebody in the back row, "Americans, America. Oh, Americans, yeah, the internet guys." We are going to be remembered for this the way the Romans were remembered for their roads. We really are. And frankly, it does reflect, I'll be chauvinistic and say American, but truly Western values. Egalitarian, ubiquitous, accessible, free. Right? It reflects our values, which is why other countries in the world really oppose not what you and I call cyber threat, but what they call cyber threat, which is what I just said. The nature of the net, that it is ubiquitous, accessible, unitary, free, and so on. We need to be careful as we construct cybersecurity solutions that we do not put at risk the very nature of the domain that we created. Ubiquitous, global, accessible, unitary, and so on. Right? Number one, we don't want our solutions making it less ubiquitous, accessible, so on and so forth. Number two, we do not want our solutions to be offered up to those who oppose the very nature of the net to legitimate their use of their solutions to actually destroy that which you and I are trying to protect. Sorry, that's getting a little indirect and international and maybe even metaphysical, but I really mean that. There's a Freedom House puts out a map every year of internet freedom. It's getting darker. All right, the map this year is considerably darker than the map just a year ago. You've got big blobs over Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and so on. And for those people, cybersecurity means stopping the free flow of information. It does not mean stopping the theft of information. Again, we just need to be careful as we work forward to solutions to stop the theft. We don't inadvertently stop the free flow or give voice or justice to those who would use those tools to suppress that which we want the web to provide. And with that, John, not bad, 45 minutes as promised. I'll stop and take any questions or comments that folks might have to offer. Yep.
General, thank you for speaking today. My name is Maria Hayden. I'm asked weekly, if not daily, if I need so I would like to introduce myself.
Good.
Hello. Nice
Hi.
to meet you finally. I'm very intrigued by the point you raised about needing a cultural and political transition so that government can kind of take a backseat to the cybersecurity innovation that industry needs to lead.
Yeah.
How do you see that happening, and what can we do as cyber enthusiasts to help that?
Yeah. So number one, to understand, there are some things only governments can do. All right, I didn't go into it, but Ash Carter gave a great speech at Stanford. All right, and he did talk about the private sector and what it needs to do. But he said, yeah, there's some stuff. We got it. We got to go do this. And I agree. I totally agree. But I think, as a matter of routine, day to day, the government needs to again begin to nurture, support, remove impediments from the private sector doing everything it can. So number one, it is that macro policy decision. Number two, as a very practical matter, all right, the validation, certification, you do so on and so forth process that the government imposes, I think is overlayered, over-bureaucratized, and over-lawyered. Right? And so it just gets in the way of technological speed that you need. And so there just has to be a certain greater acceptance of risk, because unless you do it, it's not going to matter anyway. Right? So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. There may be a need, and here I'm really getting on the edge here, there may be a need to change law. All right? Right now, we've got this euphemism we use in government and a little bit in the private sector called active defense. It's not quite clear how active you can be and still be non-indictable in the U.S. system. I think we need more clarity and maybe even a little more freedom of action. So I'm an advisor to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, all right? Unarguable Western democracy. A little easier cyber problem because they just have a few cables coming in. Okay, it's a little easier to manage. And maybe a little more comfort level with the government being more active than we are in our political culture. So I'm advisor for the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank is party to one or both ends of 50% of all banking transactions in Australia. Okay, that's a big bank. It used to be the Federal Reserve in Australia. It no longer is. I don't know. You might want to allow the Commonwealth Bank a little more running room with regard to cybersecurity outside the firewall than maybe you would give Fred's Bank in Alice Springs in the Outback. I mean, there may be private sector institutions that we might, as a matter of law, give a bit more space to in order to conduct defense. Now let me go way over the edge, okay? Our government has been late to need in these other domains too. Our government was traditionally late to need in the maritime domain. That's why Article 1 of the Constitution allows for letters of marque and reprisal, which is simply allowing the private sector to do things that in more normal circumstances, we would look to the government to do. Now, I am not looking for letters of marque and reprisal yet in the cyber domain. Okay? But all I'm saying is, this is not such an alien concept in terms of allowing the private sector to provide for the common defense. So, okay, so I'm going to go here. Go ahead.
Hi, Sharon Bogat.
Yeah.
I have a question. Voice of the moderate. If President Obama were to call you and say, Mike, I'm thinking about giving Snowden a pardon, what would you say? What would you tell the president? He might give you that call, sir. Thank you.
I would say, before you took that step, do you like your intelligence? I mean, do you appreciate the PDB? Because in my view, all right, look, I'm an old guy, all right, so I'm not a millennial. Millennials, I would say, sorry. So they tell a story at Bletchley Park, okay? I made an allusion to it. You saw the movie, right? Imitation Game, Enigma. Okay, you got it. Good. They tell a story at Bletchley Park of a young man who spent the war at Bletchley, made some powerful contributions to the effort. Goes home after the war. It's a true story. I've confirmed it with John Scarlett, who's now the chairman of the board of the Bletchley Park Foundation. John was my counterpart in MI6. And John confirms the historical accuracy of this story. That this young man then goes home and is shunned by his parents and his family for avoiding military service during the war. That he took this soft, cushy administrative job somewhere north of London, Bletchley, I don't know, and he did not join the services. He let his parents go to their graves without his telling them what he did. As I'm confirming this story with John Scarlett, he says, here's another one. When the Bletchley Foundation was trying to get this underway, we went through the roster of all the Britons who had served at Bletchley. And we sent notes to them saying, we know you worked at Bletchley. We're trying to, again, resurrect the site, rehab it. They've actually done a wonderful job. McAfee is really invested. They've got a wonderful museum there. It's really quite good. But this is before that happened. So they send letters out to people, all right? Spouses got the same letter and then learned that their husband and wife also worked at Bletchley. Okay? That young man betrayed that community. A community committed to keeping the secrets. Any president who acts in the way you just suggested runs, I would tell the president, you run a significant risk of permanently alienating that community.
General, hi, thank you very much for your trenchant comments. Is this on?
Yep, you're good.
Do you foresee, or could you spearhead perhaps a cyber project, much like the Manhattan Project, and what team would you put together? Because I think we have the people here in America that will stand behind and make it happen.
Yeah, so you all hear that, it's a cyber Manhattan Project. Yeah, so the President Obama, he's kind of continued the arc of President Bush. Mike McConnell convinced President Bush, we got a problem here. And that's when he created CNCI. Yeah. And, you know, President Obama took a look at CNCI for about a year and said, yep, that's it. I mean, there's a little cover story that we dramatically changed it, but fundamentally it's the same arc. All right? And that's all good. And the president has done that. After the OPM breach and a bunch of other things, 2 months ago, the president says, we're doubling down. We got to do more. And I think he's asking Congress for $17 billion to do more. And that's precisely what he's asking for. He's asking Congress for $17 billion to do more, not do different. At the same time, he's launched a commission, which usually in D.C. is not a good idea, but here I think it might be. He's launched a commission comprised of public and private sector folks. Keith Alexander, for example, is on it. They are reporting out in December. And so this is not something that he's in any way going to have to act on, have the ability to act on. I am hopeful that although he's doubled down with money to do more, the commission is going to come up with ideas to do different, right? That actually will make some course adjustments. And so I'm hopeful that who's ever elected president in November really embraces what comes out of this body, and maybe that will be, it won't quite be a Manhattan-type project, which after all was monolithic and done within the government. But it might actually, one hopes, since you've got both Silicon Valley and government types in this, you actually begin with a new alliance with the folks in Silicon Valley, the hill country of Texas and Austin, the Research Triangle in North Carolina. You actually have a surprising effort underway in the bayous of Louisiana, not just off of Barksdale Air Force Base. You've got an awful lot of centers being developed now. How do we get everyone in harness? Yeah. Any others? Sir.
Yeah, why is it that the Americans don't seem to be concerned about the amount of information that's collected on us by Google or Bing or any of the search engines, which seem so preoccupied with what NSA may be collecting on us?
Yeah, you all hear the question, it's a data-rich environment, and a lot of people use it for profit, but we Americans get nervous when the government tries to use it for security reasons. But number one, institutionally, Google can't put you in jail, the government can, so you've got that kind of imbalance. But you're right. I don't know enough about this to give you the fine print, but this is generational. All right, as you go through the Gen Xers, the Gen Yers, the millennials, the silent generation, the boomers, and so on, attitudes towards this change. And so there are, and I don't know that it's predictable about what the next generation is going to think. I think there's been some weaving back and forth. So we'll see. But unarguably, the private sector uses data far more aggressively than the government did. So after Snowden and the 215 program and metadata, and we had all your phone bills up at Fort Meade and so on, I'm on a panel out at Aspen again, actually the same conference with all the brain people. I'm on the panel with John Scarlett, head of MI6. I think David Ignatius may have been on it. And then Keith Alexander was there. Keith was invited. He couldn't get there. So unfortunately, he was appearing on this large screen behind us, like something out of an Orwell novel, And and Eric Schmidt. Okay? And so Keith and I are trying to explain how NSA uses metadata. At which point, Eric just launches in our support. I mean, he really was. He said, look, I get it. I know why these guys want to do this. Here's what you can do with metadata. Algorithms, relationships, predictability. And it just goes on. Okay? And I turned over my shoulder and looked at Keith, and I can see he's looking at me because his camera angle is this way. And we both say simultaneously, Eric's right. We don't do any of that, but Eric's right. That's what you could do with metadata. That's what he does with metadata. We don't do any of that stuff. And we then painfully try to point out how we just do contact chaining after you have a dirty seed number. I don't have an answer to your question. I'm just kind of circling the issue with you. It is surprising. I do not think it's set in concrete. I think these attitudes are changeable. And we'll see what it's like as we go forward. Okay, where are we? Way in the back. And then I'm taking one over here from my good friend from George Mason. So one in the back and then from Arun. And then we'll be done.
Hello, sir. So so my question looks at the international side of cybersecurity. There's been a lot of discussions about how we protect intellectual property and how we stand up for very basic foreign policy values that our country stands for. So thinking about civil liberties and about the private sector, what do you see as the essential principles of an international cybersecurity framework that would represent American values?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what the framework is, but I can talk about process, how we can get there, okay? I think you begin with like-minded, and you begin to build out, okay? And so, once we kind of get our big ideas lined up, and I've tried to suggest to you, we're not there yet, we need to think through. I think the next discussion is probably with the Five Eyes. Okay, so it's ourselves, the Brits, Canadians, the Aussies, and the Kiwis. I mean, number one, we've already got that intimate relationship, okay? And we don't spy on one another. And so we can, with confidence, have these very, the secret to the Five Eyes relationship is we don't tell each other just what we know. We tell each other what we don't know, which means you're exposing your vulnerability. You have such a degree of trust, you're exposing your vulnerability. Right? So I'd begin with 5. Then I'd probably build out to whatever additional countries I would get from the G7. Right? Skin in the game is the phrase. And then I'd go out to the G20. Again, skin in the game. And build consensus out from that hardcore of, I get it, there are many cultural traditions on the globe, but let's just us in the West begin with our own and begin with the Anglo-Saxon Western cultural tradition with the Five Eyes, out to the industrialized and industrializing, and begin to build what I would call norms, certainly not treaties, definitions of acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Again, I don't know the fine print. We'll see where it leads. Keith Alexander was doing something like this at Georgetown maybe 5 years ago. He was still Dernza. And Keith said, there are no redeeming social values for a botnet. All botnets are evil. Okay, that sounds about right. That sounds like a pretty good norm. You got a botnet, you're bad. And so, I mean, there are things I think we can develop that do that. Okay, Arun.
So first of all, as usual, I'm fascinated with all this journey through history. Every time I listen to you, I get a new perspective on cybersecurity and history. I appreciate it. So I have a couple of simple observations. You gave a whole bunch of examples of consequences. You gave a whole bunch of examples of sins and sinners. But did you really answer the question you started to ask? Why is cybersecurity still so hard?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, why do you think cybersecurity, is it because of policy? Is it because of people, process, technology? What exactly is making it so?
So the ingredients of the why it's still so hard is the mal-design to begin with. Okay, the improvident rush to the mal-designed universe with everything you and I consider precious over the last 10 to 15 years. Okay, the peculiar challenges that defense in this domain present for Western liberal democracies, particularly ones like ours with a great distrust of government when it comes to our privacy. And then finally the challenge of technological speed. It just all adds up. Now, I try to soften that a little bit by saying it took a couple hundred years to deal with the second and third order effects of the last age of globalization. I don't think it takes us that long. Right? I actually think we can handle it much more quickly, but we've got to do stuff like this. We've got to think through. Let me give you one example. So, probably the worst attack in North America is probably Sony North America, right? I mean, probably consensus. That's probably as bad as it gets. So bad that the president actually does a press op. He goes into the West Wing press room and says, yeah, it was really bad, and North Koreans did it, and so on and so forth. And all good. And then the president, in the midst of that, says, and this was just a horrific act of cyber vandalism. I'm going, vandalism? It's not spray painting a subway car in the Bronx. This is really bad. And then I had a thought, it's not vandalism. You need to call it what it is. You need to call it. You need to call it. I couldn't come up with a good word, which I think is revealing that we have not yet gotten our grip on how we're dealing. I mean, look, after you know this, once you've classified something, you know what to do. But we have not yet quite got the classifications, let alone the classifying, done yet. So we're still at that kind of building block of first principles, which slows us down, which makes it more difficult. Now, you've not paid me to do this, okay? But one of the responses in the C factor, okay? Right now, one of the great challenges of cybersecurity is offense is so much cheaper than defense. And I know Arun is working on an approach that actually tries to reverse that equation. that actually makes defense more cost-effective than mounting the attack. I mean, it's those kinds of concepts that we need to take from concept to technology, to fielding, to marketing, to universality, that actually will make us more safe. But we're still, we're still trying to conceptualize the main ideas. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Thank you very, very much.